There I is. There he
Elaine,
is. Yeah.
how are
So
you?
I'm good.
You know,
So
you're always going to be the princess of Division Street. I'll tell you, I love that book so much for so many reasons. Uh, it just resonated on all these different levels. But I kept thinking, I wonder how many great or grandchildren and great grandchildren I know of the names of people that you mentioned. You
hmm,
know,
are you from Chicago?
I'm in Chicago. I'm in Highland Park right now.
Highland Park.
I lived in California. I moved back here when my daughter was born, and it's even just the little things like I could hear my mother saying, you know, don't eat that chazarai.
Right. All the Yiddish expressions in the
It
book,
is,
right?
but it's not. You know, a friend of mine's father just passed away. He was a lovely guy. And he grew up in Humboldt. He had come here
Hmm.
like your friend, I think Ruth was her name. He was a war refugee
Yeah.
and came when he was a baby, but he went to, I think he might have gone to Thule
Hmm.
um, after you because he was born in 45. So he's
Right. He's older. Yeah.
a
So
little
he's
kid,
younger than I.
but he told me of how that neighborhood, you know, you heard Yiddish everywhere.
Right. Well, some of them, uh, like I think my grandparents didn't speak English, and we knew enough of Yiddish that we knew what they were talking about.
What
So
did it, what did those are the Elkins that you're talking about, right?
right. Hmm.
What no, where was your Zadie from?
They're all from Russia. Interestingly enough, we just had an Elkin cousin reunion on Sunday.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, so that it was just all the first cousins because there were 8 children and I think 30 cousins. And so we had about, I don't know, about 20 of us. And then our children and some grandchildren. It was people were talking about their memories of it. Yeah.
What struck me though is there's a part in the book where you said that, and this was like as early as 1951, that the neighborhood that you had become so accustomed to had started to change in
Mhm.
51. And to me, I mean, that's if it had changed by then, what was it like when I moved into that neighborhood in 1997 and could only
Where,
imagine
yeah.
all the different, I mean, it became a hipster neighborhood. You know, Wicker
Oh, yeah,
Park.
right.
Yeah, I mean, I loved it, but I had no idea until my friend and I were sitting in his apartment. And I'm looking at just this bump on the wall,
Hmm.
and it was a mezuzah that had been painted over,
Oh, wow. Wow.
and that caused me to get the Irwin Cutler book.
Oh, right, right.
So
Right. The Jews of Chicago, I think it was.
exactly.
Where
So
did you live? What was the?
oh, I lived on Beach Street, Beach and Paulina, but so that was a little north of Division. But
Mhm.
is was your father's grocery store, was that near, is that where the the Swiss hospital is now?
No, we were
Okay,
much further west. I think that's east of that, the new
okay.
hospital. Yeah. Yeah, we were like division division, and I forgot what the cross street was, but we were west of Western. Western's 24. We were
Gotcha.
like 25. Yeah.
Do you ever get back down to that part of the,
Have gone back because after the book was published, I did a reading at on the property where our store was, and the building is now the Hispanic senior housing.
hmm,
And so I went and did a reading there, and some of the residents had remembered the store and had gone in the store. So I've gone back and actually you can hunt it down. Chicago Sun-Times did an interview with me when the book came out, and we took a tour of it. And it was so there's photographs of me and the tour with I think he's the editor now, Tom something or other. You can find it, the
I'll
Chicago
figure it out. I'll
Sun-Times.
look it up.
It would have been 2006. Yeah, it was great. It was great.
Was the house still there?
The apartment building?
Yeah.
No, my apartment building was not there, but my grandfather's apartment building was there. And we went in there, and There was a store, I believe. There were some things that were still there. It was really quite interesting. It was a great tour.
Well, I'll tell you, it was like hearing some, reading these stories was, I haven't read a lot about Chicago. I
Mhm.
mean, I have, but very few coming of age stories.
Right.
So this was especially a Jewish coming of age story in a place that I'm so genuinely curious about, not
Mm.
only because I lived there, but because, my father's family lived in that neighborhood, then moved to the South Side.
Mhm.
Um, and and seeing the synagogue that your brother was bar mitzvah at, I believe that's on Hirsch in
Yeah, I
California.
think so. I think you're right. Mhm.
And I didn't know I've always been so,
Mhm.
curious about these places. But when you start to write a memoir, because obviously you're a writer, but how do you go about doing that? Because you're obviously mining from, the hinterlands of your brain, where you might not realize this stuff is still as fresh as it had been, maybe 10 years earlier, 15 years earlier. What went into the preparation, and then?
Well, it was a very kind of deliberate. What I did was I had a columnar pad, and in the a columnar pad, first I went to Chicago Tribune to read the microfiche of
Okay.
the of what was going on in the area. So I actually saw newspapers of the dates that we were there. So I could find what were events like the opening of the subway, for example, and what the Cubs score was on a certain day, or what the temperature was, or the price of foods. So I would kind of put the events in certain columns, and then I would try and put in an essay that kind of matched that particular one. Um, and then, so once I had all the columns, that's kind of the way that they matched up the actual historical event, and then what was actually happening in my life at that time. And I wrote it over and over again, and
Did did the dialogue come easy in terms
some
of?
of the dialogue I actually remembered. There were certain phrases that you never forget, like my father's. He was always reprimanded for eating too much. He was diabetic, overweight, and he said, "If I can't eat, I'd rather die." So that you remember that. And yeah, there's certain phrases that you absolutely remember, and a lot of it, as I say in the beginning of the book, was made up. But you could hear, it. Well, you write, so that sometimes the characters take over and they write the scene.
I don't write fiction, I let me say that this was inspirational, because I know that we're living in history right now,
Right.
and I think that somebody it should be chronicled at least somewhere down the line.
Hmm.
And I'm a single father. I've got a child who's 9 years old, and that's what spoke to me the most, is because
Hmm.
I was personally touched to see how close and adoring you were of your dad.
Hmm.
And I definitely identify with that, but there's also, how do you raise a kid in such difficult times?
Right.
And everything is relative. You had the Second World War. You had, yeah, I felt the pain of, debt, people, who were trying to, make their own money with their own business. And
Right.
that was vivid, but I'd imagine that was also kind of hard for you
It
to
was.
go back to.
Hmm. No, it was. It was. I really feel that I'm not a nostalgic person, and when people read the book and said, "Oh, it was so great to see the good old days," and I said they weren't really that good. I I I found it. Yeah, it's interesting because of this just cousins reunion, and we all talked about the great memories that we had, and all the fun things. And when we meet again, I'm wondering if they'd be willing to talk about the hard things, the difficult things, the painful things. I don't know if they will be willing to, but
You could
um,
always ask.
yeah, I will. I will, because it was difficult. I think as you read My parents had a very unhappy marriage, and I was, really sensitive to that. I thought my father was going to die at any moment, and he died at 48, so I wasn't too far off. And I knew the store was doing badly. And then I had those, really terrible sexual experiences as a child, which was not unusual. One of the teachers at DePaul used my book in her ethnic studies program. So I went and talked to the class there. And, these were all college kids. And I asked the girls if they had any similar experiences in terms of being assaulted. And most of the girls raised their hands. It's just, even in this age, it's sexual harassment is still, mine was a little bit worse, than that. But
that was hard to read. That was,
yeah. When I finished the book, I sent it to my brother, who passed away 2 years ago, to read. And he, of course, didn't know what happened with the neighbor. And he said, please don't send me any more pages. I can't.
And you didn't tell people that.
Pardon? No, I told no one. That was the first time I ever talked about it, but I felt it really needed to be in the book. It needed to be in the book. To be very honest about what happened.
And I'm glad that you put things in there, especially, the experience of going to Riverview and having the clowns who were Black, sitting in, and I remember, and it's been written about it. I think David Mamet had told me that they called it the African dip, where you would throw ball. And for those who are listening, it's, how would you describe it? This was a ride or an attraction?
No, it wasn't a ride. It was more of a standalone thing that they would be up on. It would be kind of a built platform, and they would be sitting on something, and you would hit the gong and they would fall in if you made it. It was never pleasant to watch. I mean, even then you knew there was something really wrong with this,
Oh yeah, and I felt that too, but it was also, without giving the whole book away, because, this is timeless. The fact that it came out a few years ago is nothing, because I think for my generation, first of all, anyone with a child, anyone who wants to know what, have a vivid accounting of what their city or any city was like back then. The thought of you getting on a streetcar by yourself at 11 or 12 to go to Riverview with this boy, I was having a panic attack.
Right. No, we all were much more, we were much more independent in some ways, because we would go downtown taking the streetcar or to Riverview. We just were so used to it. But it doesn't mean that it was like a very safe childhood in any way. It wasn't carefree. It was, we would get bullied if we went into Humboldt Park as Jews. It wasn't always, it wasn't like a safe growing up nostalgic, period. The best thing about where I grew up is that our relatives lived so close, and we were very close with our relatives. So we saw them often. And so that definitely was a positive one.
When they moved to South Shore, were you still very much in contact?
Right. In fact, those relatives who moved to South Shore eventually wound up in LA. And
oh, really?
And she's just about 6 months younger than me. And she asked for this reunion to be organized. And I have a Zoom account, and I do several Zoom gatherings. And I said, and I dragged my feet in, because as I said, I'm not nostalgic at all. And I thought, well, what are we going to talk about? We haven't seen these people for so many years. And but then it turned out to be really wonderful, and everybody loved it. But yeah, so I'm still close with that. With certain of my relatives, I'm still close with my cousins.
Did you raise, when your children were the same age as the little Elaine? And by the way, my mother, I remember when I was in 8th grade and I hadn't gone through puberty yet, I made my mother take me to a doctor.
Okay, right.
Yeah, just like it happened in your book. And I think that I was raised as a Reformed Jew, almost secular, but culturally Jewish. But for some reason, when I was 13 and 14, I rebelled and started eating kosher food and thought it was very exotic. I was going to all these bar mitzvahs where I was watching all these old men daven, and it was like very exotic to me. So I've always had an interest in, Yiddish without really thinking about the Almighty or the Creator. But I remember this man, he's passed away, and this would have been in 1983, and he was already old. But I remember him saying, like, this boy, I think he was an immigrant, so he's not getting enough protein. And he looked at me, he says, you have to eat right. It's eating right that's going to help you grow, not going to the Wailing Wall, where I just had my bar mitzvah.
Okay, at the Wailing Wall, did you do that?
Yeah, wow. Back
that
in.
That must have been impactful. Yeah.
It was very cool. But yeah. So when children came, you never had that desire to get out of the city to go to the Skokies or the Evanstons or.
No, not at all. I should tell you that my two children, joined us at the reunion, and they were really moved by it because they remembered my uncles, their uncles and my uncles, and remember that. So they were the young people were very moved by the reunion. So about what you said about, what was your question about Judaism?
Oh, no, not about Judaism, but staying in the city. Were you as permissive with your kids about taking public transportation and
yeah, they took, my kids went to Elaine Tech, and so they took buses, to Elaine Tech from where we lived. We lived on, I think, on the near north side then.
Okay.
So, they grew up in South Commons, which is on 20th in Michigan, and then eventually we wound up on the north side. So they've always been city kids, and I really wanted them to be city kids. I thought there was a real advantage to it. And I think they are grateful. Well,
Totally. When I lived in Northbrook, I thought the Evanston kids had an edge because it was very right. And then I went to Lake Forest Academy because it was so much more diverse than the public school that I was going to go to. My brother had gone to Lake Forest as well. And I was telling people, if you looked at pictures of all the trustees from LFA, the last time I looked, I mean, the majority of them are Black, and you would think that this was a brochure from Kenwood, and these were the people that I grew up and I'm still in touch with and really look up to. But it was also, I got to University of Wisconsin a little after, I think 4 years after your daughter had been there. And so I knew all the Lane Tech kids and thought they were super cool.
Yeah, she had a good time there, yeah.
So after you went to Roosevelt, right?
Right.
What did you do after that in terms of, I mean, not to go completely into your entire life, but, your career and how, leading into, when you worked with Jane Byrne, how did that trajectory happen?
Well, after high school, I went to Roosevelt University in the city on a scholarship. And then after I graduated Roosevelt, I got married and I became a school teacher. After I was married, I became a school teacher and taught in the Chicago public schools. And then my spouse at the time, he didn't get drafted because he was in medicine. So he joined the Army, and we were sent to Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
Oh.
And this was right before the Vietnam War. And we had one daughter in Massachusetts, who interestingly enough now lives in Boston.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then after we got out, he was a captain, so we lived in captain's quarters.
Yeah.
There's another book of mine that you could read that actually tells my adult story. I call it a Romana Clef, because the name of the book is called She's Not the Type. And it's fiction, but the first half of the book is pretty much my life with everybody disguised. So if you get that book, you'll know that. The second half was kind of wishful thinking. So, because the heroine becomes a reporter or something I've always loved to do. So after we came back, and actually on the way back in our little Volkswagen with our little daughter, on the radio, we could hear that they were bringing back some of the soldiers and some of the medical people because we unfortunately got out. And then we wound up in Prairie Shores, and where my spouse did a residency. Was it medical school? No, I think residency. Residency. And then we had another daughter there. My kids are 18 months apart.
Okay.
Then we moved to Glenview, Illinois, because my husband was working at Northwestern Hospital in Arlington Heights.
Okay.
But then he decided to be a psychiatrist, and so had to go back to the city to do another residency there, and went to University of Illinois. And I was overjoyed because I hated the suburbs. I absolutely hated it because I really loved living in Prairie Shores and being in the city and being so close after growing up in Division Street. So we moved back to this neighborhood called South Commons, which is at 20th in Michigan. And it was an urban experiment designed by University of Chicago architect Ezra Gordon. And actually, my daughter Jill is doing a documentary on it about the time we lived in South Commons. And so she's working on that now. You know, she's a producer and a filmmaker and all of that. Yeah. So she has a documentary, which, you know, should be out in a couple of years.
Oh, good. I just walked around there. My friend lives on 18th Street.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, no, or 16th.
Right. Yeah. It was developed by Dan Levin, if you know Dan Levin. In fact, this building that I'm living in is Dan Levin, and East Fan Club is Dan Levin. So, yeah. So we moved to this kind of, because the ads were very enticing to me. It talked about this urban community, interracial, and there was townhouses, and we moved in, and I've written about this so many times. You can just find out. It's called Homecoming. I think it was one essay I wrote about it. That I felt like Dorothy going into Oz. That it was, and that the old Elaine, the little housewife, was gone forever. I became editor of the newspaper Commons Commentary. I produced the musical theater. I was editor of head of the tenants. I mean, I just went nuts. I just have to say I went nuts.
In a good way.
In a good way for me.
Yes,
you know, I mean, because it affected who I was completely. It affected my marriage, though my spouse had lost his little Jewish housewife. I just wanted to be on my Selectric, you know, getting on newspapers. And so that community changed all of us. Well, not so much my spouse, but my children. You know, my spouse is transgender, you know, so that's why I'm always having trouble with the genders.
Exactly.
But it definitely changed my children. I mean, the three of us, it changed us completely, you know, my kids were the last white kids in their school. I went back for a master's degree in urban planning. While I was living in South Commons, the architect, Ezra Gordon, I was really into everything. Ezra Gordon knew how much how active I was. And he was on faculty at University of Illinois, Chicago, and said they're starting an urban planning curriculum. I think you would really enjoy it. And he and Dan Levin wrote letters for me. And so I went to get a master's of urban planning degree there. I was the oldest person in my class, often older than my professors, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it because it was everything I was interested in education, healthcare, you know, everything that an urban planner would be.
It was a new life. I mean, you really.
It was a new life. The old Elaine was completely gone. So after that, after I got my degree, think I went to work for Bernard Urie Associates, which was the PR company for South Commons. And they knew about me and interviewed me. So I went to work for them, learned all about, press relations and all of that. And I'm trying to think, when did I, eventually, I was walking along Lakeshore, like along Lakeshore Drive somewhere, and I saw Jane Byrne's husband, Ray something or other. I think that his name was Ray. And he was a real estate reporter for the Sun-Times, but he was also Jane Byrne's husband.
Sure.
And I said to him, and he knew me through when I was doing real estate writing. And so I said to him, if the mayor ever needs somebody who has a degree in urban planning and can write, look me up. And so, she hired me, they hired me. And
That's great.
I loved that job too. I mean, that job was just made for me. I just loved it. And I was very effective there. I started a couple of things. Well, I started what was it called? Technology. I mean, something on technology. I was very creative in that job and gave her ideas, but she really didn't like me that much. I respect her a lot now, and I respect her then because I think she was ahead of her time, and she had no allies. She made no allies. And
the city was so, I mean, how would you describe, I was probably within my first 10 years,
right,
when this is going on. And the city was there was a lot of crazy stuff happening. I mean, it was definitely an eventful time.
Very, very white supremacy, I would say, in some ways, and it was, she was so disliked by the aldermen, and it was so much just dissension going on during that time. And but I left before Washington came in, because I could see the handwriting in the wall that everybody was going. And I got hired by Ruth Love.
I was just going to ask you about her.
Right, who was superintendent of schools.
Right.
And I became director of communications. And Ruth Love was in some ways like Jane Byrne, is that they didn't know how to make allies.
Right.
That they were very smart women, but didn't know how to make allies. But when I was with Ruth Love, I came up with the idea of the Chicago Public School Alumni Association. And I have pictures of that, because I felt that not enough people knew how many prominent Chicagoans were Chicago Public School graduates. So we did some work on that, and that was lots of fun. And then I got hired by a public affairs PR firm called Jeskalka Turman. I don't know if you know them, but they do all the tough political stuff. And I worked for them for a while. And then I started my own PR business, and I did PR on my own for a while until I kind of slowly phased out of it.
What can you tell me about Ruth Love? What was her story specifically? Because that was a name that was always on TV.
Right. Well, she was a powerful woman who had, I did, but she was just confronted by the Chicago system, never could really get a foothold here. I didn't, we weren't buddies or anything, but I did work for her administration, and it was tough, but she just couldn't handle the Chicago system. It was very hard for somebody from out of town to come in. So she didn't have many friends here.
Do you still stay atop Chicago politics?
Oh yeah, very much. But I'm much more interested in national politics now. Yeah. But I don't know if you know about my curating, but every morning, we're Facebook friends, right?
Yes, we are.
So every morning I get up very early, because I go to bed early. And I start with the Washington Post, which has become my favorite newspaper now.
Mm.
And I pull articles from there and post a couple paragraphs, and I maybe do 10 articles from the Washington Post.
Mm.
And then I go to the New York Times and do a couple from them. Then I do Chicago Sun-Times, and then the Trib. And then, so by the time people are waking up, there's about 20 articles on Elaine's page, and that's all they have to read for the day.
Oh,
And
that's
I get other newspapers too that, but those are the 4 that I check first thing in the morning.
you prefer to actually do you get the papers where you're like going?
No. I just do online.
Okay.
I like online because then I can copy and paste when I'm doing,
Sure.
doing my curating, right? I would have newspapers piled up all over the place.
My freshman year in college, I saw a documentary about Izzy Stone, I.F. Stone, the writer. And I think he had been a mentor of Bob Woodward and Bernstein. And he used to really come down hard on the young journalists. He said, by the time it's 9 o'clock, you should have read 7 different newspapers.
Right.
And I couldn't imagine living at a time. I mean, there were so many newspapers. There were socialist papers. There were papers for workers. Obviously, there were probably still Yiddish papers when you were
Right.
a kid. But what?
Well, actually, it was Rick Jaskolka, who I worked for in PR. That was the first thing he would do in the morning. Read all the papers, go through all the papers. So it was, and through him, and then through Bernard Urie, I really learned, like, even when I curate and I post, I always, I don't know if anybody appreciates this, but I always have the reporter's name at the top, always. And because I select certain, I don't do the whole thing, just like certain paragraphs. And if a paragraph just have like the last name, like Bannon, for example, today, I have to go until and find Steve Bannon. I have to have the entire name and the entire description.
Sure.
I'm sure no one really appreciates all of that.
Listen, now they will. The hell you go through to make it happen. No, but it's good. I have seen and have read the articles that you've posted. By the way, do you remember a lady named Bess Lawrence, who was a superintendent, or no, she was a high school principal in Chicago. Bessie Lawrence, short lady.
I've heard of her. Yeah. What school? Oh, yeah. Her name was popular. Yeah. Yeah.
It's my stepmother's mom, and I know that she was. I think Jesse Jackson used to call her Sister Bessie, and I think she might have been at Cooley High at one point, but
yeah. Where did you go to school?
Well, I grew up in Northbrook.
Yeah.
And I went to public school, then I went to high school at Lake Forest Academy, then Wisconsin in Madison, with 1 year abroad, nothing, or a semester abroad. It was nothing earth shattering, but I've always been nostalgic, to, wherever I'm at, I want to know what it was like. It's funny now, my daughter will say, what was it like in the 80s? Like,
how old is your daughter now?
She's 9.
9.
So but she has a similar curiosity about history and asking me questions.
Yeah.
And it's fun. And back to your book, A Princess of Division Street, it's hearing your interaction with your dad, even if it was sort of based on some kind of interaction that you would have had. The father that you portrayed in that book really had an upbeat personality.
Very much.
Didn't want you to worry.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I really regret, that I don't know, and we talked about this with the cousins. I don't know anything about my parents when they were young. They came here from the old country. I knew them, as my parents. I wrote about in the book that my mother was never very happy in that marriage, but I don't know what they were as kids, or teenagers, or all of that.
Did your mom talk about it at all?
No.
Not even as an older person when you're looking at the singer sewing thing.
And everyone is dead. All the sisters and brothers are dead. And
where was she from when she was she born in
Russia? Yeah.
In Russia.
Russia, yeah. Yeah.
And how old was she when she came here?
You know, we have a certificate. Somebody found the certificate. She was young. She was a child when she came here. And I think a couple of them were born here. I'm not sure. But, you know, the Division Street at the time was all immigrants, whether it was Jewish or Polish or, so it was really very comfortable for us. It was, yeah, it was.
I think that Ashkenazic Jews, unless you're religious, know so little about Eastern Europe and where their families, because it really sucked. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
entire families.
Yeah, where did your parents come from?
Okay, so my great grandfather on one side was from Bessarabia, which is now Moldova and the Ukraine, a town, which I guess it was Romania. Others, so, and then start just going north up to Lithuania and Latvia. It's almost like their own little iron curtain.
Yeah.
But, you know, you hear things like I noticed on the picture of the shul that your brother was bar mitzvahed, that it was Austrian Galicianer.
Right.
And apparently my grandfather, whose family came from Latvia, would make fun of my grandma jokingly by calling her a Galicianer because her family. And then if you go to Waldheim and all these cemeteries, they're all divided up by country.
Right. Yeah, my parents are in Waldheim, and you're right that there's sections, right? Mm-hmm.
But you know, mindful that your head is very much in current events, and everybody's is. It's interesting to go back. You know, all of your uncle's children that were older than you were in the service. The boys all, you know,
the uncles, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they really had so much to contend with in the present that I think that the last thing that they would talk about was what it was like in a shtetl, you know.
Well, they were kids. My uncles were kids when they came here. But they all, you know, by the time the war, they were young men, you know, probably in their 20s or something by then.
And they came home.
Yeah.
And even see action?
They all came home.
Right.
Came home. Yeah, I remember that. It's interesting the things we remember, you know, because people talk about the pandemic and we've never lived in anything like this. Mm-hmm. But, you know, we lived in, you know, we had fire drills, we hid under desks, we had rationing. We didn't know who was coming home. But of course I was a child through it. So I don't think it impacted me as much as my parents did.
I want to ask, and I'm going to ask in earnest, because whenever I talk to somebody who's my parents' age or older, the way things are sort of portrayed in the news now, some being very extreme, especially, you know, when it comes to race and racism, mm-hmm. and all of that stuff is true. But have you lived in worse times where you've known that things have indeed gotten better? It's not perfect, but I think that I'd sent you a documentary that I wanted to talk to you about, and it didn't sit well with you. And I was interested, and we could talk about this off the air, but yeah. It was a very unique view on race made by the filmmaker who's experiencing these things. And yet, you know, one of the things that I couldn't be more delighted that Trump is out of there, and there's a new, and there's a something to look forward to. And I'm glad I'm talking to you today. I think everyone's in a good mood. But the way things, you know, as our cities were exploding over the summer, I'm always curious to talk to somebody who lived at a time of political assassinations, Jim Crow, real racism, especially in Chicago. Mm-hmm. I mean, which is still somewhat segregated in a sense. Mm-hmm. And I'm not an expert, but I could definitely that's my first impressions. Have we come a long way from things, or do we just have a lot further to go?
Yeah, I don't think we've come a long way from things at all. I think I talk a lot about race because um, living in South Commons in this multiracial community really changed, how I feel about the world.
Right.
And at some point, um, I guess I forgot what book I was reading. Maybe it was The Underground Railroad or something.
Oh, yeah.
I got very interested in books by Black authors and what I call unrecognized racial history.
Mhm.
And I organized a discussion in my building, the lounge area, called What Black Women Want White Women to Know. And it was Darlene Glanton, the Tribune writer. Do you read Darlene Glanton?
Yeah, yeah.
So she was the guest, and we had this discussion. And I had read maybe 10 books before that time, of all by Black authors, all well-known books, James, all of them. And I printed up the list of everything, and the people were more interested in kind of discussions about segregation than reading the books that I wanted them to read. So when the pandemic hit and we were all home and I was still doing my reading, I wanted to make sure I continued reading. So I started a Zoom book group that only reads Black authors. And we've read about a dozen books by now. Once a month we read the book. I'm the moderator. And, we've read The Warmth of Other Suns, Just Mercy.
Who are some of the authors?
Isabel Wilkerson. I could send you the list if
Please.
you want. But so we do. So I feel that there is so much for white people to learn about Black history, about slavery, Jim Crow, all of it, that we just don't appreciate. And I think things are changing because, one of the things about the riot on January 6th brought to bear, which I think were two of the good things that resulted from it. One is it really showed how terribly awful Trump was, that even you could not deny what a horrible, not only president, but person he was and what he had engendered. And also,
I could never get over it always stopped. I couldn't wrap my head around the presidency, but I just didn't like him,
And the other thing that was good that came about it is that you couldn't deny the difference of police treatment to Black Lives Matters and white. And that was something that I think will be changing. So I do think that white folks we have a lot to learn, and you have to read these books to really appreciate. And as I said to Darlene, when I read these books, is I don't understand why Black people haven't killed us all. I mean, it's just the horrific things that Black people have gone through. And it's really, I love my book group because we're all learning so much from it.
Well, I think dialogue is the most important. And I'm inspired that you're doing that, because I just see people talking at one another.
Right.
I take a different path. Like some people, a lot of people won't talk to anyone who voted for Trump, or you know what? I'm curious, so I'll have a conversation with anybody, because it's when the dialogue stops. Now, I think it's great. I'm a big fan of August Wilson's work. Did you watch?
I did. I loved it. Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, it's important to watch it. It really is another look of the unfairness of like the music industry to Black artists. And besides the acting of the young man, Chadwick, who died.
Yeah.
It's just incredible acting. Yeah, I think it was really good. It was very good.
There's a part in your book that
Rainey's Black Bottom, right?
Yes. There is, while we're on the race issue, so there's a part in your book where I think it was one of your parents, and I don't know, it was, the Jewish people said Schwarza, or the way you said Schwarzi, not you, but had spelled it out. And there was a part in the book where
I think that your father was saying, I don't blame, the Black folks for wanting to get out of, South Chicago and move to better, the men are home, they've got money to spend, they're taking advantage of the GI loan. And there was something that, I think it was your dad, and he said, when we came over, we had organizations to help us. And that was always, I heard that my entire life. And then I had a political sociology class at Wisconsin. And I remember saying something very similar out loud. I was very proud to raise my hand. They don't have the B'nai B'rith Society in this. I got the greatest dressing down by a Black grad student who said, and he was so respectful to me. He said, "That's a young man." And he used to say, he was like, "Young man, that's not true. There were always relief organizations." And he started to enumerate, via Fisk University and the early days of the NAACP and the Blacks that were very much involved and philanthropic. It's much more, it's complex. And I don't remember the exact conversation, but I just loved how he told me that I was wrong, because there was, and I wouldn't feel defensive anyway, because I never claimed to know anything. And if you could prove me wrong, I'm grateful. But this, that was a great experience. So that the book reminded me of that. But one of my favorite, and we could end this phase of the conversation, because I'll have you back when I read your next book. But the part that really got to me the most, and I still think kids are capable of this today. Tell me the story about when your brother offered to use the cash that he got from his bar mitzvah to help his parents out, your parents.
Yeah. I see that scene, and I'm wondering, but I think I remember that it's true. And I don't remember if I created it or not, but I see them sitting on the bed, counting it, and Ronnie offering to give it to my parents. I mean, we knew we weren't rich, and we knew the store was struggling. And I'm sure that's something Ronnie would do.
And I can't imagine your parents having that same reaction to their mensch 13-year-old bar mitzvah boy offering them money.
Right.
And then realizing we created that guy, so this wasn't so bad.
No, Ronnie was, as I said, he died. He was just like my dad. He was just full of life and hail fellow, well met. I think he was looked like my dad was like.
Yeah, handsome.
Yeah.
Right. Very dark, swarthy.
Right. And I'm very good friends with his children. My niece and nephew on that side, I'm very close with them.
So are you optimistic about things?
Absolutely. I mean, right. I couldn't be happier with Biden and Harris and his administration, because it could have gone the other way.
Sure.
To me, it was too close for comfort, and it would have been dystopian 4 years if you can see. And I'm getting my shot tomorrow. By the way, I'm getting my first COVID shot tomorrow.
Mazel tov.
Yeah.
I'm excited for you. I want to get that too.
Yeah. Well, you have to be my age to get it.
Well, I could lie.
I'm very optimistic. Did you see the first press conference?
No, I didn't. I watch it all.
Like normal. I mean, you have to. She's going to do it every day. So
the look of, you'd have to have a heart made of wood or ice to not have been moved just by Kamala Harris. Like, just looking at her, it was something that impacted me, and I could really appreciate her happiness.
Well, that was so brilliant of Joe Biden. He won me over. He wasn't my first choice, but when he chose Kamala Harris, it just showed his brilliance, and that he could pick someone who gave him such a hard time. Just showed how smart he was about it, and it's just perfect. I mean, the inauguration I wrote yesterday, on Wednesday while it was going on, I wrote on my Facebook page, "I'm verklempt," and it's up to almost 400 people saying, "Yes, I'm crying." And it was so moving. It was just because of what we went through for 4 years. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, there's yet to be books written about what that man, you know.
It's gonna be interesting, or maybe not so interesting. Maybe you just knew it the whole time, or maybe some surprises. You never know.
I don't know. Oh, I think it'll be worse. There'll
Look,
be, you know, more tell-all books, and it'll be worse than we thought.
You know, we're only as happy as our least happy loved ones.
Child
Yeah.
one, right?
Yeah. So and my mother is thrilled, and you know everybody is. So, and I'm happy that you're happy. So
How old is your mom?
she's 78.
Yeah, so, and I'm 82, so we're close, yeah.
Yeah,
Did she get her shot yet?
I don't know. I'll tell you that she was always telling me about Transparent,
Oh, yeah.
and was very excited that I was talking to you. And I know that you've talked about that a million times. But I really enjoyed talking to you.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
and I appreciate it. And I'll share
And what
this.
are you doing now, Steve? What's your latest venture?
Well, you'd see my film, just trying to get this off the ground. I'm writing co-writing a memoir with a well-known, recently passed musician's widow.
Mhm.
And so that's occupying my time. And then my daughter's at home
Good.
most of the time. Today she's with her mother in the city.
Mhm.
So I always think that having done the artistic itinerant route, it prepared me most for the whole COVID mishigas. I was like, I've done this before, but it's hard to watch other people kind of fall apart.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm overjoyed staying home. I mean, I love staying home. I love Zoom, and
Yes.
I have a dog. So if you have a dog, you can't be depressed.
What kind?
Where is she? You can see her.
I love dogs.
Can you see her?
Oh my
lying there?
goodness, yeah. She's her own dog. I'll tell you, I was house sitting for my ex-wife's and husband's greyhound, and for about 10 days, and my daughter was with me too. And yeah, I missed my daughter when she left, but there was something when that dog was gone, I was really depressed.
Yeah, no, dog. She's saved my life during this,
Yeah.
Because I have to walk her, and it's another person in bed. It's the best thing. You can't even get a shelter dog now. They're all out. Yeah.
Feel free to, if you need anything from north of Tui, I'll drive it down to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It was great talking to you.
Likewise. We'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.